The golden lights of Hollywood shimmered against the velvet sky as the cameras rolled inside the grand ballroom of the Beverly Hilton. It was 1967, and America was watching live. On stage stood the legendary crooner, Dean Martin, relaxed, charming, glass in hand, delivering his signature effortless humor. The audience adored him. His voice felt like velvet. His smile could calm a storm. But that night, something was different. In the front row sat television royalty, Lucille Ball, fiery red hair glowing under the lights, posture poised, eyes sharp as ever. To the world, she was unstoppable. She had conquered television with I Love Lucy, broken barriers as a female producer, and built an empire with Desilu Productions. But beneath that legendary smile lived exhaustion no one could see. America saw Lucy the comedian. No one saw Lucille the woman carrying years of pressure, heartbreak, and relentless expectations. The build-up. The televised charity gala was meant to celebrate resilience in entertainment. Hollywood's finest gathered to honor pioneers who had shaped television and film. Dean Martin had been asked to host because of his effortless wit and national appeal. Lucy was being honored that night. Backstage, assistants rushed around her, adjusting her gown, reapplying powder, whispering last-minute schedule changes. She nodded, smiled, and delivered jokes on cue. That's what she did. That's what she had always done. Perform. Even when her body begged for rest. Even when her heart felt heavy. Only a few close friends knew how tired she had been in recent months. Running a studio, managing productions, facing critics who doubted her leadership, navigating personal struggles the press would never fully understand. But Lucy never let the public see cracks. Not until that night. Dean's unexpected turn. Midway through the broadcast, Dean approached the microphone. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, his voice calm, almost unusually serious. "We celebrate laughter tonight, but do we ever stop to ask what it costs?" The audience chuckled politely, unsure whether this was another setup for a punchline. Dean continued. "Lucy, you've made America laugh for over 15 years. You've made us forget our problems. You've been strong for everyone." He paused. "And my question is simple. When was the last time someone asked if you were okay?" Silence. The room shifted. This wasn't scripted. Lucille's smile froze. The cameras zoomed in. Dean's voice softened. "Really okay." The moment, for the first time in decades, Lucille Ball didn't have a comeback. No joke, no punchline, just silence. Millions of viewers leaned closer to their television screens. The audience sat stunned. Her eyes shimmered under the stage lights. The question wasn't cruel. It wasn't mocking. It was human. And that was what made it powerful. Lucy inhaled, sharp, shaky. Her shoulders trembled. Then, in front of millions watching live across America, the queen of comedy collapsed into her chair, overcome not by embarrassment, but by emotion she had held inside for years. Gasps filled the ballroom. Dean stepped toward her instantly, no longer the playful host, but a friend. He knelt beside her. And what he said next wasn't picked up by the microphones, but those close enough heard it. "You don't always have to be the strong one." America witnesses something rare. In living rooms from New York to Los Angeles, families watched in stunned silence. Television had shown scandals. It had shown drama. It had shown rehearsed emotion. But this was raw humanity. After a few long moments, Lucy stood again, her composure partially restored. She took the microphone, her voice quieter than anyone had ever heard it. "I don't remember the last time someone asked me that," she admitted. And in that confession, something extraordinary happened. The invincible icon became relatable. The powerful executive became vulnerable. The legend became human. And America fell in love with her all over again. The deeper story. What the public didn't know was that Dean Martin had insisted on adding that question. Producers had warned him. "It's live television. Don't go off script. Keep it light." But Dean had noticed Lucy backstage earlier that evening, sitting alone for a moment longer than usual, staring at nothing, shoulders heavy. He recognized that look. He had worn it himself. Fame was loud. Loneliness was louder. And sometimes, the strongest people needed permission to feel weak. A shift in perspective. That night changed more than ratings. It changed conversations. Newspapers the next morning didn't mock the moment. They praised it. Lucy shows her human side. Dean Martin's question that stopped the show. Viewers wrote letters, thousands of them, thanking the broadcast for showing vulnerability instead of perfection. Women especially felt seen. Mothers, working professionals, performers. They saw a woman who had carried the world on her shoulders finally admit she was tired, and they felt permission to admit it too. What Lucy said after later interviews revealed that the moment had been a turning point. "I had forgotten I was allowed to feel overwhelmed," Lucy said months later. "I thought strength meant never stopping." But strength, she realized, also meant honesty. Dean never claimed credit. He brushed off questions in interviews. "I just asked a question," he said casually. But it wasn't just a question. It was a mirror. And Lucy finally saw herself, not as an icon, not as a performer, but as a human being deserving of care. The real collapse. The collapse wasn't physical weakness. It was emotional release. Years of pressure dissolving in seconds. And what could have been humiliation became empowerment, because vulnerability, when met with kindness, becomes strength. The lesson part 1 leaves us here, on a stage where laughter paused long enough for something more powerful to emerge. Empathy, understanding, permission. The night the Queen of Comedy stopped performing and started feeling, and a crooner known for jokes reminded the world that sometimes the most important line isn't a punchline. It's a question. When the broadcast cut to commercial, the applause inside the ballroom felt distant, almost fragile. Stagehands moved carefully. Producers whispered into headsets. The cameras stopped rolling, but the weight of what had just happened remained suspended in the air. Dean Martin stayed beside Lucille Ball for a few extra seconds before helping her stand. He did not rush her. He did not turn the moment into humor. For once, there was no clever line waiting to soften the edges. Lucille inhaled slowly. Years in television had trained her to recover quickly. She adjusted her gown, nodded to the stage manager, and walked off with steady steps. To the audience, she looked composed again. But behind the curtain, the strength she had carried for decades finally loosened its grip. In the dressing room, the noise from the ballroom faded into a low hum. Lucille sat in front of the mirror, staring at the reflection she had perfected for years. The bright red hair, the sharp lipstick, the confident posture. For the first time in a long while, she did not see Lucy Ricardo. She saw Lucille. An assistant asked gently if she needed water. She nodded. Her hands trembled slightly as she held the glass. It was not embarrassment she felt. It was release. Dean knocked softly before stepping inside. There were no cameras here, no audience. Just 2 professionals who understood the cost of being adored by millions. "I hope you know," he said quietly. "I didn't mean to put you on the spot." She gave a faint smile. "You didn't," she replied. "You just asked something no one's asked in a long time." The truth was simple. Lucille had been tired. Running a studio in a male-dominated industry demanded relentless focus. Every decision was scrutinized, every mistake magnified. She carried responsibility not only for herself, but for employees, productions, and reputations. And on top of it all, she was expected to be funny. Always funny. Dean leaned against the table, his usual playful energy replaced by sincerity. "People think we're built from something different," he said. "They forget we're just people who learned how to perform." Lucille let out a soft laugh, the kind that did not aim for an audience. "Performing is easier than pausing," she admitted. Outside, the program resumed. Her awards still awaited presentation. The show would go on. It always did. But something subtle had shifted. Word of the moment traveled quickly. In living rooms across the country, viewers had watched not a scandal, not a mistake, but a human exchange. Letters began arriving at the network within days. Women wrote about exhaustion they never voiced. Men wrote about pressure they rarely acknowledged. The question Dean asked began echoing beyond the ballroom. When Lucille returned to the stage later that evening to formally accept her award, her tone was different. Calmer, less guarded. "I've spent years making people laugh," she told the audience. "Tonight reminded me that it's all right to let someone else carry the moment once in a while." The applause that followed was deeper than before. It was not just admiration, it was understanding. After the event, headlines were surprisingly kind. Commentators spoke of authenticity. They called it a rare television moment. Some even described it as brave. But bravery had not been her intention. Honesty had simply slipped through. In the days that followed, Lucille adjusted her schedule slightly. She delegated more. She allowed herself evenings without meetings, small changes, almost invisible to the public, but meaningful to her. Dean, as expected, minimized his role. In interviews, he shrugged. "It was just a question," he repeated. Yet those who knew him understood that he recognized something others missed. He had seen the pause in her smile backstage, the quiet between jokes, the weight beneath the spotlight. Fame often hides fatigue behind applause. That night, for a brief moment, the curtain lifted. The incident did not redefine Lucille Ball's legacy. She was already a legend, but it added dimension. Strength paired with vulnerability, leadership balanced with humanity. For Dean Martin, it revealed another layer as well. Beneath the relaxed charm was a man attentive enough to notice when someone needed compassion instead of comedy. The broadcast ended. The ballroom lights dimmed. The audience went home. But the silence that followed carried something more lasting than laughter. It carried permission. Permission to ask. Permission to pause. Permission to be human, even in front of millions. In the weeks after the broadcast, life returned to its usual rhythm. Scripts were revised, meetings were scheduled. Studio lights flickered on and off with mechanical precision. On the surface, everything seemed unchanged. But inside Lucille Ball, something had quietly shifted. She began noticing how often she said "I'm fine" without thinking, how quickly she deflected concern with humor, how naturally she carried pressure without admitting its weight. For years, that had been survival. In an industry that rarely handed authority to women, especially women in comedy, she had learned to be sharper, tougher, faster than anyone expected. Running a studio was not a role she stepped into lightly. Every production decision carried financial risk. Every casting choice reflected on her judgment. Executives who once doubted her waited for mistakes. Competitors watched closely. And through it all, the public still expected Lucy, the fearless, flawless entertainer. What Dean Martin had done that night was not dramatic. He had simply interrupted the rhythm. He had placed a human question in a room built for performance. And the echo of that interruption stayed with her. One afternoon, during a production meeting, Lucille noticed tension rising in the room. A director argued about budget limits. A writer defended a scene that would cost more than projected. Normally, she would have stepped in firmly, ending the debate with authority. Instead, she paused. She asked the director, "Are you overwhelmed?" The question caught him off guard. His posture softened. The frustration in his voice eased. The discussion shifted from conflict to problem-solving. It was a small moment, but it changed the tone of the entire meeting. Lucille began understanding something she had not allowed herself to consider before. Strength was not diminished by empathy. Authority did not collapse when vulnerability entered the room. Meanwhile, Dean returned to his own routines of recordings and appearances. He rarely spoke about the gala. When asked in interviews, he redirected attention back to Lucille's accomplishments. Yet privately, he reflected on how fragile even the strongest personalities could be under constant spotlight. He knew the cost of being perceived as effortless. Behind the relaxed stage persona, he carried his own pressures, expectations to maintain charm, to never let seriousness show too long. That night had been a reminder to him as well. Performance could not replace connection forever. The public conversation around the broadcast continued for months. Commentators described it as a turning point in televised authenticity. Viewers sent letters not only to the network, but directly to Lucille's office. Many thanked her for showing emotion without apology. Some letters were simple. "I cried with you." Others were longer, describing personal struggles, marriages strained by silence, careers built on pretending everything was manageable. Lucille read many of them herself. Each one confirmed what she had felt in that moment on stage. People were not drawn to perfection. They were drawn to truth. Gradually, her public appearances changed tone. Her humor remained sharp, but interviews carried more reflection. When asked about success, she began speaking about exhaustion as honestly as ambition. She did not dramatize it. She did not seek sympathy. She simply acknowledged reality. At a later awards ceremony, when congratulated on her resilience, she responded calmly, "Resilience isn't about never bending. It's about knowing when to rest." Those words circulated widely. The industry noticed. Younger performers began speaking more openly about pressure. Studio executives held quieter conversations about workload and balance. The shift was subtle, but present. For Lucille, the greatest change was internal. She no longer felt obligated to hold every burden alone. She trusted her team more. She allowed imperfection in moments that once demanded polish. One evening, months after the gala, she ran into Dean at a private dinner. There were no cameras, no audience. "I suppose I owe you something," she said lightly. He raised an eyebrow. "For what?" "For asking a question." Dean smiled. Sometimes that's all it takes. They did not elaborate further. They did not need to. Both understood that the most powerful moments in entertainment are not scripted. They happen when someone dares to step outside performance and into sincerity. The spotlight would always return. The applause would always follow. But now Lucille Ball stood within it differently. Not as a woman pretending to carry everything without strain, but as a leader who understood that even icons are allowed to pause. And in that understanding, her legacy deepened, not just as a pioneer of comedy, but as a reminder that humanity does not weaken greatness. It strengthens it. Time has a way of softening even the brightest spotlight. Years passed, productions changed, audiences evolved, and television itself entered a new era. Yet the night when Dean Martin asked Lucille Ball a simple, human question continued to live quietly in memory. Not because it was dramatic, but because it was honest. For Lucille, the moment became a private landmark. She rarely revisited it publicly, yet those close to her noticed a steady transformation. Her leadership style matured into something firmer but warmer. She remained decisive, but she listened longer. She still demanded excellence, but she recognized limits, her own and others. In boardrooms once filled with tension, she introduced something uncommon. Space. Space for discussion. Space for disagreement. Space for someone to admit they were overwhelmed without fearing dismissal. It did not weaken her authority, it strengthened trust. Employees who once saw only a powerful executive began to see a mentor. Younger actresses, navigating an industry still skeptical of their ambition, sought her advice. Instead of offering polished sound bites, she shared stories of pressure, doubt, and endurance. She did not romanticize struggle. She described it plainly. "There are days you feel larger than life," she once told a small gathering of performers. "And there are days you feel smaller than the stage. Both are real. Neither defines you completely." The industry continued to celebrate her accomplishments. Groundbreaking comedy, bold business leadership, barriers broken. But what deepened her influence was something quieter, her willingness to acknowledge the cost of success. Meanwhile, Dean Martin carried on with his career in music and television, maintaining his signature charm. Yet those who watched closely noticed subtle sincerity in certain interviews. When conversations drifted toward fame, he occasionally offered reflections that surprised reporters. "People see the show," he once said. They don't always see the person behind it. He never claimed credit for what happened that night. To him, it was instinct, a recognition that laughter alone cannot sustain a life lived entirely in performance. As decades moved forward, that televised exchange became part of entertainment history, not replayed endlessly, not sensationalized, but remembered by those who saw it live. It represented something rare for its time: vulnerability, broadcast, without humiliation. In an era when image was everything, authenticity had quietly stepped onto the stage. Lucille's later years carried both triumph and reflection. She understood that legacy is not built only on achievements. It is built on moments that reveal character. The question that once caught her off guard had reshaped her understanding of strength. Strength was not endless endurance. It was balance. It was knowing when to stand tall and when to sit down. It was allowing others to witness imperfection without fear. Near the end of her career, during a retrospective interview, she was asked what advice she would give to performers entering the spotlight. Her answer was simple: "Don't forget you're human first." Those words carried the echo of that long-ago evening. The ballroom lights, the unexpected pause, the silence that felt heavier than applause. What Dean Martin asked did not cause collapse in the way headlines suggested. It caused release. It opened a door that had been closed by expectation and routine. And through that door stepped a deeper version of a woman the world already admired. The legacy of that night was not scandal. It was permission. Permission for leaders to rest. Permission for entertainers to feel. Permission for anyone, anywhere, to admit they are not invincible. In the end, the most powerful line spoken on that stage was not a joke, not an award speech, not a rehearsed tribute. It was a question asked with sincerity. And sometimes, one sincere question can change not only a person's evening, but the way they carry the rest of their life.